Hi everybody, I'm Ryan, and today we're going to talk about Jeskai Aggro, also known as Jeskai Convoke. We're going to talk about card choices, the overall strategy of the deck, and essentially how you're going to be playing the deck. Let's jump into it. So this is Jeskai Convoke. What this deck is essentially attempting to do is play a bunch of cheap creatures that you can either capitalize on or make artifacts, so you can gleeful demolition them to be able to get a bunch of creatures very, very early in the game, to then use Warden of the Inner Sky to get really, really big and apply a ton of pressure and be able to select your draws, to be able to play Knight Errant of Eos to be able to dig through your deck, and to be able to play Imitating's Recruiter to attack for a ton. It's all about getting a ton of small creatures and then using those three cards to be able to just like capitalize on that. The lands, there's not much to look at. They're just a bunch of lands that enter untapped in the first few turns because those are the turns that matter. But let's start with Novice Inspector. It's a 1/2 for 1 when it enters Investigate, which means create a clue token. Now, sometimes we're popping this clue token. Sometimes we're just using it as an artifact for gleeful demolition. Spyglass Siren, I'm skipping over Warden on purpose. Spyglass Siren is a 1-mana 1/1 with flying. When it enters, create a map token. Again, for a similar reason, we're playing Novice Inspector. It creates an artifact, which we can then gleeful demolition. Clockwork Percussionist is a 1-mana 1/1 with haste. When it dies, exile the top card of your library. You may play it till end of your next turn. So this allows us to dig through our deck, but also it's an artifact in and of itself. Again, for you guessed it, Gleeful Demolition. Gleeful Demolition says destroy target artifact. If you controlled that artifact, create 3 1/1 red Phyrexian Goblin creature tokens. All of these cards allow us to play a bunch of creatures for really cheap, and sometimes 3 creatures for 1, being able to destroy one of the artifacts that are made with Novice Inspector, Spyglass Siren, or Clockwork Percussionist itself. The other card we're using to sort of flood the board is Resolute Reinforcements, which is a 2-mana 1/1 with flash, which is kind of interesting. It actually works really well with Protect the Negotiators in the sideboard and other instant speed things that we could be doing. But when it enters, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. So this just allows us to create 2 creatures for 1 card. It's 2 mana, so meh, but also it creates 2 creatures for 1 card, which is excellent. So between all of these cards, we're putting a ton of creatures on the board. So we capitalize on that by playing Warden of the Inner Sky, which is a 1-mana 1/2. When it has 3 or more counters on it, it has Flying and Vigilance, which is cool. So how do we get counters on it? Well, you can tap 3 artifacts and or creatures you control, put a +1/+1 counter on Warden of the Inner Sky, and scry 1 activate only as a sorcery. So what's cool about Warden of the Inner Sky is you can tap itself for it, but also you can tap the clue with Novice Inspector. You can tap the map with Spyglass Siren. You can tap all these tokens on Gleeful Demolition, etc., to make Warden of the Inner Sky very big and scry 1 a whole bunch of times, so you can sort of control the top card of your deck. And notice it has Vigilance when it has 3 or more +1/+1 counters. So it's a really good blocker and attacker. What's relevant about that as well is notice that clues don't require tapping to sacrifice it and draw a card. So there are times that you can tap the clue to pump up Warden of the Inner Sky and then still draw a card off the clue. That comes up quite a bit. Another way that we sort of capitalize on this is Imitating's Recruiter. Imitating's Recruiter has an adventure called Train Troops, which is pretty solid, creating 2 white knight creature tokens with Vigilance. If we're casting this, that means things have gone a little wrong, but I've won games by casting this, so don't worry about it. But Imitating's Recruiter is a 3-mana 2/2. When it enters, creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain haste until end of turn. So after we have a bunch of these creatures, we play an Imitating's Recruiter. Everything is +1/+0, and we jam often for game. We're also playing Knight Errant of Eos. It is a 5-mana 4/4 with Convoke. Convoke meaning I can tap creatures and pay for mana of that creature's color, or generic mana. When it enters, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal up to 2 creature cards with mana value X or less from among them, where X is the number of creatures that convoke Knight Errant of Eos. Put the reveal cards in your hand and then shuffle. So especially because a lot of cards in our deck are not very powerful in and of themselves, it's really important we're able to dig through our deck either with the Scries with Warden or digging through with Knight Errant of Eos in order to capitalize on these really cheap creatures with these 3 payoff creatures, and Knight Errant of Eos does that really well. Also, being a 4/4 body for effectively 0 mana very often is super, super relevant. Often a very powerful start and a very common start is playing Novice Inspector or Spyglass Siren on turn 1, Gleeful Demolitioning that artifact on turn 2 and playing another 1-drop, and in the same turn on turn 2 playing Knight Errant of Eos, putting 2 cards in your hand, and you have an insane amount of power, and then you can follow it up with like an Imitating's Recruiter or something. Now we do have some non-creatures joining the party, mostly as removal, so we can get things out of the way and jam a whole bunch. We have Case of the Gateway Express. It is a 2-mana case. When it enters, choose target creature you don't control. Each creature you control deals 1 damage to that creature. What's beautiful about that is that often we have a lot of creatures, so Often this just gets rid of a creature. Also, the case gets solved when you attack with 3 or more creatures. And then once it's solved, creatures you control get +1/+0, which is another anthem and a way to pump up these creatures and make these really cheap, kind of poopy creatures very good. We're also playing 4 Sheltered by Ghosts, again as removal. It is a 2 mana aura. We enchant a creature you control, and when it enters, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until Sheltered by Ghosts leaves the battlefield. And the enchanted creature gets +1/+0, has lifelink and ward 2. So main deck hate for these aggressive decks, already very good in this format. The red-based decks are insane, but also it gets things out of the way so that we can jam. It allows us to race other aggressive decks and pumps up the creature it's on, which is relevant, especially if it's like an evasive creature or something, or a big creature like Knight Errant. As far as the sideboard goes, we're playing 2 Destroy Evil, both as enchantment hate and as like Shieldred hate and stuff. We're playing 1 Split Up. Split Up is really good in the mirror match, especially after they convoke for a whole bunch, or really against these aggressive decks that are going to be attacking and we're kind of racing against. Any deck that we race against, we want to be siding Split Up. Playing 2 Disdainful Stroke for these big mana decks like Domain. 2 Protect the Negotiators, mostly for slower decks that have cards that are a really big deal, like Sunfall or Split Up or Temporary Lockdown, that we need to be countering or we just lose. Playing a Lithomantic Barrage, mostly for the Dimir deck. Being able to take out those creatures for 1 mana is super relevant. And then we're playing 4 Torch the Tower, mostly for these aggressive decks, also really good against Mosso Dread Knight, and there's a lot of applications for Torch the Tower here, especially since we often have the artifact to be able to sacrifice to bargain, which is not true for a lot of Torch the Tower decks. So if you like this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. Check me out on social media. Links are above me and in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.